Everyone, and welcome to the December 7th Utility Advisory Commission meeting. We will start with roll call, starting with Commissioner Forcell. Here. Vice Chair Johnston.
Present.
Commissioner Metz.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Here.
And I am present as well. I do not believe we have any agenda review and revisions. So do we have any oral communications from the community for an item not on the agenda?
If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. I see no hands raised.
Thank you. So we will move on to the approval of the minutes. You may recall that our last meeting was off cycle, and so we did not have the minutes from the prior meeting to be approved. So we have 2 months of meetings to approve. So we will start with the October 12th, 2022 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments or changes to those minutes? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as provided?
I'll move we approve the October 12 minutes.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll do a roll call, starting with Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnson,
Yes.
and I also approve the minutes, so those are approved. We will move on to the minutes of the Utilities Advisory Commission meeting held on November 2nd. Do any commissioners have any comments to those minutes? Okay, does anyone want to move to approve the minutes as provided?
Move to approve. I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
and I also approve those minutes. We have no unfinished business from the last meeting, so we will move on to the Utilities Director report.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. Good evening, Commissioners. Councilmember Pauac. I do have a few items here. A little bit on update on the hydroelectric update. It's been early, but so far in the 2023 water year, it's roughly a great start. As of December 5th, the participation totals in Northern California are about 80% of the average for this time of the year. And then Central California, there's been about 120%. The cold weather has meant that most of the rain has formed into snow, and the snowpack levels are about 160% of the average Northern California and Central California. However, as we know, reservoir levels remain very low to the past several drought years, and projections for the 2024 are very low, and the projections to produce around about 56% of our long-term average levels of hydro output, and about 73% of the long-term average levels for 2024. We did go to the council, or I'm sorry, we did go to the finance this couple of weeks ago, and we made a new recommendation, which there'll be an informational packet once the council approves this. We asked for you all to look at the hydro rate adjuster of 0.26, doubling the 0.13 that we had. But we actually looked at the months, and we felt that hydro was coming in actually much lower, and price for electric was going up. It was $5 million in 2 months period of time it cost us. So at that period of time, we went to the finance committee, and we asked the committee to look at a 0.33, a 0.048, and then also 0.05, a nickel increases. the finance committee decided that they liked the idea of actually moving it to 0.048, so 4 cents and 8 tenths of a penny. And so it is a unanimous vote. It will go to the consent calendar in the upcoming December meeting on December 19th. Hopefully it will get passed on the consent at that period of time. And then my thought is that we will bring that report back. The only thing that's changed is the amount. There was no change in the verbiage other than a little bit more of an explanation on why we felt that there should have been an increase from when the commission actually put that initial motion forward on this. So we will bring it back to you once it's approved. As always, I'm sure as all of you know, gas prices in the winter, and we anticipate natural gas prices to be much higher than usual than the winter due to the changes in the market, supply and demand. The gas market prices can fluctuate greatly from month to month, and due to the factors such as the national weather, gas production, and storage levels, we believe that costs are going to rise. CPAU purchases gas on a monthly basis, and it's bought at market price. And it does have a pass-through cost directly to the customer and at the end of the day. So we know that this will be a trend, and with the weather being as cold it is, we've seen total increases from usage from customers. We do have, as always, we have energy efficiency measures to keep utility costs down. Energy efficient tips can be found at thecityofpaloalto.org, efficiency tips. Also, too, is that our AMI project is going to be deployed approximately 1,800 meters, electric, gas, and water advanced metering infrastructure, which is the AMI meters in January through March. That's going to be our beta test for the meter reads comparisons to the AMI data, quality assurances, AMI meters and systems. It'll give us an opportunity to take a look at some of our base load. We're going to deploy these in all electric homes to look at the load shapes and transformers loading, which is essential for grid modernization. Just recently, the last 2 weeks ago, approximately, we had about 15 customers that were out on a block, and we found that when we actually did a rating portion of it, the transformer was actually overloaded. And the only way that we found it was because it was actually an outage. But what ended up happening is that we found that there was 15 homes being served off that transformer. 10 of them actually had EVs. And there was some electrification that had gone home into the home. So you'll hear later tonight some of our findings on our grid modernization. That's going to be very important to us, so we don't get into these types of situations with these overloaded transformers. EV program, Stanford Medical Transportations and CPAU have been working on electric vehicle EV chargers projects at multiple properties throughout Palo Alto. We're excited to announce that Stanford Medicine has successfully completed and installed 15 new EV charger ports at Hoover Pavilion Garage, which is right off of Corey and Palo Alto. It's right there at actually real close to where the substation of where Corey is located at, right across from the shopping center area. And we were able to work with them, assisting them, helping through a smooth contractor selection and some equipment installation ideas. Stanford's also permitting a phase for installing EV chargers at 2 other garages. And our communication team is coordinating a ribbon cutting event with Stanford, which will be sometime in the middle to later part of January. And I'll keep the commissioner apprised when that would be, so that if any of you would like to be there at that period, we can stay in touch and let you know. Also, too, is that another award, Response Appliance Disposal, RAD. We recently earned a championship award from the US EPA through this RAD program. This EPA program is a volunteer partnership that brings organizations and recycling refrigerators materials together. CPAU was recognized for the refrigerator recycling program and is reducing ozone and greenhouse gases emissions through insulation foam recovery. And we accepted that award for this outstanding program that we had put together, where people would just put their refrigerators on the side of their home out front. And then we were working with a recycler that would actually take them and actually get them recycled at that point. The One Water Plan. The One Water Plan is evaluating long-term water resource needs, makes the city water supply more resilient. The city held its second water plan meeting with the community workshop on December the 6th to discuss water supply, conservation options, and draft evaluation criteria. A recording of the workshops will be available on the website at cityofpaloalto.org workshops, and staff will provide updates to the UAC on the Water One plan in February of 23. And the last, I think the biggest piece is just around the water supply. SFPUC continues to call for voluntary water use reductions for the regional water system. Palo Alto's cutback level is 8%. The city has taken measures to continue water saving efforts, including increasing education and outreach programs. We've implemented water restrictions such as limiting irrigation to 2 days a week. The health of the trees, we've been able to ensure that trees are being watered at this period of time. These actions seem to be making an impact. The billing months for July through November, Palo Alto reduced its water rates by 10, or water usage by 10% compared to the baseline of 2020. So we're actually meeting and succeeding a little bit more than what we had asked. They're asking us for. So with that, that concludes my report. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions? Any commissioners?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
You said we're deploying 1,800 meters as part of the beta test for AMI. And then you said they're going out to all electric homes. Do we infer that there are 1,800 all electric homes?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not all going towards that. That's why I said that we're also looking at where we think that there's going to be some electrification in some of the pilots, and that'll be the areas where we look at for putting on these homes for the transformer overloading possibilities, or loading to see what those transformers are actually being loaded at. So it's not just electric homes, but it will be in areas where we'll do our beta.
Neighborhoods where you really feel like you can use the information provided
Yes.
by AMI to plan for transformer upgrades.
That's correct.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Any other commissioner questions? I have one follow-up on that, which is, are you basing that on permits? Is that how you're coming up with the to be electrified homes?
I think the thing, so the electrified homes, yes, we have records of all the electrified homes that had already gone 100% electric. And then also we are going to take a look at if people have been putting some heat pump water heaters or maybe some electric heating in, we'll know what those permits. So we are going to use permit in history and look at if there's groups, because it's not going to help us if there's only one customer off that one transformer. So we are going to look at groups. We also have one area in town that is still what we call 4 kV. It's not a 12 kV system portion of it. It's most likely going to be the area that needs to be upgraded the most. And so that will probably be part of the beta phase that we'll look at. It's coming out of Hopkins sub, which is only about 3 to 4 megawatts. So it's a very smaller area that we can kind of control. And so I think some of the meters will go in that location as well, to what we can learn from that.
Okay, it just makes me think about how we don't have great visibility into the EV market, who has EVs. And if you had this one area where a transformer was taken out because of too many EVs and on one transformer, that, I don't know, maybe we can think about a way to get that information from people. maybe voluntarily let us know. I don't know if DMV records could be used, but there's only going to be more EVs.
Right. I would think that, and I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but I would think that we'd be able to go back to the development center or even probably in our own records to take a look at it and see which permits were pulled for EVs from customers. It would probably tell us then at that period where we could gain better information at that point.
It just might be interesting to have some of the beta homes be in those areas.
Right. Understand.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Thank you, Director Batchelor. We'll move on to the adoption of a resolution authorizing use of teleconferencing for our UAC meetings during the COVID-19 state of emergency. We've seen this for the last many months. Is there any comment or question from any commissioner? Yes.
I'm curious. I forget if I'm supposed to know this. Do we know when the state of emergency is scheduled to end?
Commissioners, this is Tabitha Boatwright, the Utilities Administrative Assistant. As far as we understand, the state of emergency is stated to end in February of 2023.
Thank you so much.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Do we have a motion to accept the resolution authorizing use of teleconferencing?
I move we adopt the resolution authorizing use of teleconferencing.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
And we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Now we will move on to our first discussion item of the cost and reliability of different backup electricity technologies. Do we have any community comments? Do we have one?
Chair Siegel, we have a member of the public that would like to make a oral communication at this time.
Okay. It's someone remotely who has no, here. Okay.
He's here in person.
Okay. Are we waiting to have, do we have technical reasons to wait? Okay, yes.
I did raise my hand during the, on Zoom, and it was not noticed again. So I'm here in person, and so I apologize because I tried to do it in order, but, and I have a comment for each of the other agenda items just as well, but they're all short. The attack on the North Carolina substation where 35,000 people are still without electric power days later today puts a spotlight on the vulnerability of the electric grid. This is not the first instance. On April 16, 2013, a sophisticated sniper attack disabled the PG&E transmission substation in San Jose. This included accessing an underground vault to disable phone lines beforehand and leaving 1 minute before the police arrived for a second power line into Palo Alto. We should ensure our existing substations and also the PG&E delivery station are hardened. Specifically, particularly from domestic terrorism, but also from flood and earthquake. While I realize it's human nature not to prioritize low probability but high impact events such as these, it's critical to ensuring reliable power. This includes ample alarms, security cameras, barbed wire, electrified fences, and on-site security at the Colorado Ave sites. I would recommend a security audit for starters and also to ensure the existing mechanisms are all working properly and well repaired, and that additional ones that are deemed appropriate are added. I would also request the Palo Alto Utilities work with PG&E to make sure their site does it as well. That's my general comment. And when we get to item number 2, I have another comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the community? No, great. I think we have a presentation from Dr. Perkins. Is that right?
Tap. Get up, look.
He's gonna speak first. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah. Sure, of course, yeah.
Right.
Sorry for disrupting. It was not my intention. This is item, I have a comment on the discussion of the cost and reliability of different okay. I think as a city, we should add microgrids for critical infrastructure such as the public safety building, which already has safety panels, which already has solar panels. And in fact, I was working with Brad and they cut it. They cut the battery supply because of budget concerns. But it would be good to add eventually as an example of a microgrid. I think in general, moving more towards microgrids is a good thing. This would also give the public safety building the ability to go for a week or 2 weeks after a major earthquake if there was no electricity, because generally their generator only is about 3 days. But in general, I think we want to start moving to microgrids. The second comment is on subsidizing batteries for residential use, both single family and multifamily. It dramatically lowers the amount of electricity going in and out of a house from solar. And it can also be used to lower peak hour supply during the summer, during our peak hour loads. The ultimate solution is more electric cars such as Tesla start providing two-way charging, but car manufacturers will be reluctant to do this because it shortens the battery life, which makes their warranties more costly to provide. So I'm not sure how fast that will go. Lastly, my mom had a backup generator when she lived on Martha's Vineyard. The problem is it needs to run weekly and has huge amounts of fuel stored online. I think there were 3 tanks about this big, this high, and her neighbor had them as well. I just think in earthquake country and in Palo Alto, it's just not viable. There's just way too much fuel stored online. Thank you for letting me do my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchen.
So with that, I'm going to introduce Senior Resource Planner Elena Perkins to talk a little bit about this reliability report that we've been promising for a little bit of time to come back to you or actually come to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lena.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm just going to share my screen with the slides and try to speak into the right place and not unmute anything I should not be unmuting. Okay, with that, so I hope we're all looking at the title slide and you can hear me. Please let me know if you can't. This is a discussion of a targeted deep dive look at a multifamily residence. This work was primarily completed by our Stanford Schultz Fellow, a graduate student at Stanford over the summer, Keola Iskender, and he is unable to be with us today because he is quite ill. And so, so I am familiar with pretty much all of the assumptions in the analysis, but there may be some questions I might have to circle back with you later. So it's a simple presentation. I was just going to quickly walk through the biggest takeaways of some of those very busy figures. And I think it's fine to interrupt as we go and have your questions. There we go. All right, so we should be looking at figure 1. So this is one of the primary takeaways. And what this is trying to encapsulate is just the representation of the cost, not the reliability of each of these 7 different technologies that were examined for backup power for single family residences. You can see the large error bars or uncertainty bars. And I will say that this analysis, it was taking in data in July of 2022, and this is before the war in Ukraine and before the, decisions which have now been largely finalized, which affect supply chain issues from China with trade cases and them avoiding some findings by the federal government there. So these prices on both the natural gas side and on the batteries and solar are lower than they are today. The width of the uncertainty bars has to do with the how much. There's a number of factors that go into that, but how much of the power that you are offsetting from the solar system that is in tier 2 versus tier 1, as well as your battery dispatch, your flexibility of your loads there. And so to the degree that you are staying in self-consumption rather than exporting to the grid for an NEM 2.0. So that's largely what's driving that. Any questions on this figure? So this figure is trying to represent the reliability for different duration of outages in the summer for an all electric single family home, because going forward, we are interested in how much of an all electric home loads can be backed up by different technologies. A few things that I'll, draw your attention to is that most of the outages over the last 7 years, 10 years have been short in duration. And, for those outages, you do get pretty good coverage from a battery only system, as well as most of the technologies. We can talk about some of the technical nuances, sort of, indefinitely. I think we could talk about the technical nuances, but, and I think the other thing to just notice here is that the third bar from the left, the solid gray bar, as well as the back 3 bars, they are providing more than 100%. They're not providing just 100%. And so it was sort of capped at the daily load. They're capable of providing far more than 100%. And so we're trying to look at it in terms of a usefulness, but they are not providing exactly and only 100% in the summer. Questions on this? Okay. In the winter time, it's projected residences will have a higher load than in the summer, and solar insolation is lower. So that's what's driving the differences between summer and winter. Winter loads are projected to be, peak winter loads about 92 kilowatt hours per day, and solar insolation is substantially lower than in the summer. I do have a backup slide on this, but it came to my attention that our models for the third, you cannot see my cursor. So for the solid yellow, the solar PV plus battery, as well as the solid orange, solar PV plus battery, that, as long as your inverters are appropriately sized, the battery and the solar can be run in parallel, and that was not modeled here initially. And so the backup power provided by solid yellow bar, both the solar and storage options, will be higher in these situations. So the costs are basically unchanged from prior slides, but these will provide closer to 75% coverage in the 6-hour outage and beyond.
I did have one question. So with the winter, there's an assumption of a certain level of heating for a home. And in the summer, was there a level of air conditioning assumed as well?
Yes, there was. It's just that Palo Alto is in general quite mild, and so the heating load is more. And these are, again, modeled load shapes. We will get a lot more data, for our exact climate zone, and it's and it also, I will just speak to tightening the building envelope helps year round. So, and we don't talk about that as a resiliency measure, but it will always help, and it'll help in an earthquake too. So. Any other questions on this?
Sorry, this is just a point of clarification. When you annualize these capital costs, did you simply just amortize it over the life of the home, 25 years, or how did you get to that number?
All of these are based on a 20-year net present value. And so for batteries had to be replaced at 10 years, and everything else was expected to last 20 years.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so this is, another busy slide, but just trying to have cost and reliability / resiliency and other factors on the same slide to try to get a sense of it. It is arranged in ascending order of annualized cost, and so, a portable gasoline generator that is not wired into a whole home transfer switch or any kind of transfer switch. We're talking just a generator on wheels that you plug in extension cords into and then have to run the extension cords through a window, a cracked window in your home. That is the least expensive option. And then, ascending up to the solar PV with the grid forming microinverters and battery. So I think these costs should be taken with a grain of salt, given the changes in the supply chain issues, as well as the cost of natural gas. So everything is higher than it was in June, but that's kind of, I'll leave it at that for now, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Sorry, Dr. Perkins, I'm going back to your first, taking you back a little bit. So if you go back to your first slide, you highlighted the annualized cost. And one thing that I think that might be valuable both for us as well as for the population is if we put these annualized costs relative to what our annualized cost is from CPAU currently. Because looking at this and I say, okay, it's $1,200 a year to completely solar panel my house, put in an inverter and do battery. So $1,200 a year. So my bill is, say it's $200 a month. Well, that's $1,200 a year. So what is it? How do I make that decision? Right.
Yeah. And so that's a good point. And I can possibly follow up with you offline to make sure I'm fully understanding your ask, or feel free to email to better interpret this in the context of annual bills and what that would mean out of customers' pocket.
Thank you. I think that would be worthwhile, but I think for the council, or sorry, for commission, I think what's important is that we recognize that it's clean, which is beautiful, right? It does take capital, so it's costly. But on an annual basis, for those of us who are going to be living in our homes for 20 years, this actually may be better from an environmental perspective than simply continuing to live in our gas-powered homes or natural gas-powered homes. So that's an important takeaway. When in net, it may actually be the same cost.
Okay, now that I've fully
Got that?
grokked what you were asking, and now I fully internalized and digested what you're asking, I do think this is in addition to your bill.
Okay.
That this takes into account bill savings from NEM 2.0, and that the uncertainty bar represents, to the degree that you are able to offset your own usage versus exporting to the grid and only getting the NEM 2.0.
So
Right.
this chart that's in front of me does not represent replacement of a fully electric home.
This represents a 7 kilowatt solar system for every solar system that's here.
But
And yes,
But we highlighted that, we said on average, Palo Alto homes, we assume Palo Alto homes function at 7 kilowatts. That was the underlying assumption.
I missed the last part on average. Go ahead.
So what was our underlying assumption for an average Palo Alto home? If we use 7 kilowatts for a photovoltaic system, what do we assume the current burn rate, if you will?
Yeah. So I have it on a seasonal basis, and I guess it is in the report, I believe, on an annual basis. I don't want to misstate
No.
it.
I think that's just,
I think it's
it's an important
around,
statistic. I think you would agree.
I think it's around 12,000 kilowatts in kilowatt hours. I have to check up. It's in the report there for an all electric single family home. Yes.
Yeah, I have the
Yeah,
data
you
which you
asked it.
shared with me, which is the basic mixed fuel house with no EV is 7,500 kilowatt hours a year. The all electric house with no EV is an additional 4,200 kilowatt hours a year. So it's like about 11,800. And the EV is assumed to be about 2,000 kilowatt hours a year.
So if I take those figures, if it's combined, it's 7,500, so it's on par, right? If it's combined, gas and electric.
Walk me back. It's on par with what?
If it's gas, if the home is both gas and electric currently, not fully electric, it's running 7.5 kilowatts per year.
No,
Correct?
7,500 kilowatt hours
kilowatts
per year.
It's kilowatt hours per year.
Kilowatt hours. Am I doing my comparison correct?
I mean, I think your point is valid that, are these solar systems optimized for an all electric Palo Alto home in order to capture the maximum benefit? Is that part of your
That's
question?
part of the question, but for those of us who are not fully electric yet, if we're fully electric, I agree that there's a delta there that we will not be able to fully submit. We will not be able to fully replace CPAU power. But if for those homes that are both gas and electric, and perhaps don't have an EV yet, there's a compelling argument for doing solar. Is that incorrect?
No, I mean, I think that it's a similar without a battery.
Mhm.
If we look at a mixed fuel home with a 5 kilowatt system, the costs end up quite similar to the first yellow bar, the solar PV here, where you can, potentially usage largely, net out close to zero by adding solar.
Terrific, thank you.
I had one question about table 2. What is the width of the, no, the one with the Christmassy one? That one. What does the width of the bars mean?
Yeah, this was, taking a lot of different charts and metrics. So, from a reliability perspective, this is taking, across the seasons and across when the outage were to occur. If it's occurring at night in the wintertime, then you have different reliability from solar without storage. And so trying to sort of average it on an annual basis with the distribution of when these outages have occurred to give a rough representation of the different reliability that they can provide. And then on the noise level and CO and CO2 emissions, this is much more qualitative where, several stakeholders and also the Stanford professors that were involved in the process and then the project thought it was important to represent that the gasoline generators and the natural gas generators had health and safety drawbacks that the solar didn't have.
Okay, so red is bad. Red means noise or emissions.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the width has to do with reliability?
So for the reliability level, for the left 4 columns, that is reliability.
Okay.
And then the other 2 columns are noise level and dangerous CO2 and CO emissions, because there is a non-trivial amount of CO poisoning that goes on in every broad outage. And it's, some of it's from portable generators.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I have one follow-up question on that. For the right side, the noise level and the CO2 emissions. So if there's a wide green, is that saying it's avoiding CO2 emissions? And what does it mean for noise?
Yeah, it's just, again, this was sort of, we were reaching for a qualitative representation, but some of the stakeholders, including the professors involved, didn't feel like was adequately captured. If you're just looking at cost and reliability and these externalities that are meaningful, especially to health and safety. So yeah, noise means that they are quiet. They do not have, substantial noise associated and, emissions beyond CO and CO2 for the portable gasoline generators, as well as the whole house.
But so the width on the emissions is it's avoided emissions? Is that what that means?
Yeah, this is, again, it's more representing the CO and the NOx and the SOx emissions than the CO2 emissions. And so more from a health and safety perspective than avoided emissions.
Sorry, I just have one final comment. We heard earlier this evening about the possibility of offering subsidies for batteries, and I think this is a great use case that might be worth a discussion offline. And that is, if the majority of our single family residences within Palo Alto are both gas and electric, which I believe they are, and we have overloaded transformers because we have a number of homes that are all functioning on CV. We need time, to be frank. We need time to be able to replace our grid. If we offer subsidies or help the federal government with subsidies on PVs and these battery storage systems, aren't we buying ourselves time and giving the CPAU an opportunity for the CPAU? I'm not certain as to how much benefit we'd be offering, but I'd love to hear.
And I can let Director Batchelor speak to this as well, but it does depend on how the battery is wired into the system. And so it can look like an additional route to dump power into the system and basically an additional backfeeding onto the grid, which actually
I wasn't suggesting so much that the homes feed the grid as if selling our power back to PG&E or something like that. Or I think they call it self-generation or something. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that if I'm a homeowner owner and I have an EV and that is causing problems on the transformer down the street that I share with 10 of my neighbors, if I am now charging my EV on my own solar power battery, I'm taking my load off the grid. I'm taking my load off the transformer. And that's why, that's how I view help and time.
Yeah, I think there's an issue of, once people install the batteries, if they're going to be satisfied with not backfeeding onto the grid. And then an issue of, once it's permitted and interconnected, could they wire it differently? I think there's some trepidation from the engineering and planning and buildings department because, if there are modifications post-inspection, it can cause really, really hot elements if things are not appropriately upsized, and that can cause safety issues.
No, I think that's a great comment, Dr. Perkins. And it's one thing that's actually come up a couple of times, particularly our regulations with respect to shunt trips, et cetera. But if we extend this hypothetical argument further and we say, okay, the city's going to offer subsidies, but in exchange for a subsidy, you have to let the city manage the installation and the city set the rules for the installation and, quite frankly, place padlocks on the panels associated. Are we helping ourselves or are we just creating more of a bureaucracy?
No, I think that, if we were going to subsidize, of course, then we would definitely want to be involved with what that looks like on the house panel and how the customers are going to wire that. I think in that aspect of the example that you're giving is that, yes, I think that helps us in the load of the transformer at that period of time. If we knew that there were quite a few EVs that were on that one particular transformer, because usually, your neighbor and you may not know exactly when you're going to go ahead and charge. So I think the thing would be is that if you were able to do it, you could then help us out and also help the rest of the neighbors so it doesn't create that outage that we had seen in the last couple of weeks in that case. So I do think that there's some advantages to that. It does buy us some time. Because I think the thing is, as we all know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process. But, anyway, and I think that that's part of that whole education and communication piece that has to go out to the community and folks that actually have EVs, have those conversations with them, see if there's some possibilities. But I think the big piece is the education to get the word out to the community.
And if it's okay, if I just add, one more point to that, because I think Director Batchelor summed it up nicely. And I guess to your point, if everyone is operating within their permit and not modifying things after inspection and after permitting, then another additional piece of technology that could be helpful for the homeowner to operate within the capacity of their electrical equipment could be something like the Span Smart panels in that case. And again, it's just a question of, I think, whether our engineering team is comfortable planning around that or whether it's, and so whether it would be taken into account with the grid modernization and planning or not. But it would certainly, if everyone were to flatten their loads and charge, then
Listening to you both, I think one thing that would, in addition to buying time, we already, I think the last figure that I heard on grid modernization was $80 million minimum. That's not a small amount of money. And if we turn that on its head, so to speak, and remove the issue, or at least buy more time, then perhaps that $80 million can be $40 million initially, and we'll work on the rest, but we don't really have such an urgent issue because we have homeowners who are actually taking responsibility for their own generation. I mean, that's a significant public service announcement. That's a significant public education and maybe even utopian, but it's not a bad idea considering we're talking about spending $80 million upgrading our grid.
Yeah, I mean, it does just require a reimagining of how everyone interacts with their electricity, you know, in Palo Alto and basically in the United States. You know, I mean, it's been a sort of social contract that people permit what they want and they get the power that they need. And
Commissioner Forceau.
Yeah, just jumping into that conversation. Since Commissioner Smith brought up the idea of subsidizing battery storage at individual homes, I would be very surprised if that were found to be cost effective to locate energy storage at the granular level of single family homes. And I think the much lower hanging fruit, since you already brought up, people need to be re-educated, the contract of when electricity is available, like the much lower hanging fruit is an educational campaign around when to charge your car, since that's the most shiftable load. And if a block wanted to buy time for their transformer, the low hanging fruit is to coordinate their electric vehicle charging, which costs considerably less than subsidizing power walls on single family homes, which, you know, have a very limited ability to serve the community. But stepping back into the report in general, thank you, by the way, and please pass on my appreciation to Mr. Iskander. I realize that when you're doing an analysis of this kind, there are like so many different variables that you want to try on different sizes for, you know, so for example, this report looks at 6 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, because you had to pick a few. If there's a further iteration on this, I would be very interested in holding the period of power outage fixed and looking at different load requirements, because it sort of takes the average single family home. And there seems to be an assumption built in here that during whatever emergency it is, the home is going to require everything that it requires, even if there's no emergency. And I would be very interested in a scenario that tries to drill down on what's the minimum required electrical output for a household. And, you know, maybe it's the variation is 2-person, 4-person and a huge family or something like that. But it's like, let's assume they need a refrigerator. Let's assume they need a cooktop, some number of lumens of light that are sort of enough for the household, some number of gallons of hot water, internet, medical equipment. But, you know, not like everything has to be on and blasting as if it was a non-emergency situation, just because I suspect would have lower requirements and lower costs, and some of these things might be more accessible. And I guess the other piece of this is a super interesting report, and certainly out in the community there is, I think, you know, a recognition, since we've had some high-profile power outages, some worry, especially with our SCAP and our ambitious electrification goals. Is there a piece of this that goes beyond the UAC that's sort of like the utility marketing? Here are some options if you're worried about this, or we'll work with you, or here's an informational pamphlet, or is this really just the UAC asked for this report so the UAC gets to see this material?
okay, I'll take your first comment question.
Sorry, that was a lot in one go.
Yeah, I'll take them in order. But that was some of the discussions we had with OES and others, is if there's everyone is not just going to burn through their whole battery / tank of gas. And so, and the numbers I heard were sort of 25 to 30%, sort of of the average, is kind of often taken as a baseline for critical loads. And so I think that's part of the reason that we represented the percentage of loads for each of these on like figure 3 that I have pulled up. But I hear you, and so if on a winter day, on a peak winter cold day, and this is not, it's not assuming 7 days of storms either. This is about what you could cover, and it's definitely better than nothing for all of them. But I definitely, I think the reason that we capped it at 48 hours was because a lot of the technologies other than the battery kind of reach equilibrium after 48 hours. And so, 2 weeks looks fairly similar to 48, depending on weather. And a whole lot of and natural gas and gasoline availability. But and then to your second point, I think that there are high level discussions going on with SCAP committee. To your question on where does work on resiliency go after this, and education specifically. I think there are some high level discussions going on related to the SCAP and also related to other utility initiatives. And I think OES is interested in having some public education, but in terms of the utility staff time that they would need in order to create those public messaging campaigns, I think that's where we have so many priorities right now that are competing for our limited engineering resources.
So this is not a preview of some currently planned campaign. This is, at this point, it's just a conversation, which is, I'm not complaining. I'm just clarifying. Yeah, cool.
So, yeah, this is not a preview, although there are some discussions.
Vice Chair Johnston.
Well, just to chime in on that point, I would encourage you to think about putting this information out in a way that the community can grasp it, because I think it's really, I think we do. I think there are a lot of benefits, as we've discussed, to encouraging people to develop more resiliency. If we're going to, particularly if we're encouraging people to electrify, we've got to either assure them that they're going to have 100% electric power from the utility, which we can't guarantee that. So I think we want to encourage them to have a backup plan. I think this is really useful information about what kind of backup plans are available and also the pros and cons of each. I've just gone through this whole analysis with my daughter to help her with her house. And this would have been useful to me to have it. We ended up in the same place with the same information, but I think there are a lot of people that could make use of this information. So I would encourage some way of making this information accessible to people in the community. Maybe not a whole campaign about it, but at least getting it somewhere on the utility website and some way of letting people know that this information is available.
So Vice Chair Johnson. So I think that, as Lena was mentioning, this reliability and resilience plan, it's really kind of moving forward into the council's ad hoc sustainability. And I think the thing is that it's being considered, to be part of the work plan for the council. Because I think the thing is that, yes, we play a part of it, but we also have to look at the bigger picture portion of it, that what council's looking at in this aspect of it. And I think that, in my opinion, I think that and to the community as a whole. And I think that this is part of it around this piece. And I think also, the hardening of the grid is just another piece of this whole electrification plan. And I'm sure that Councilmember Cormac, who sits on one of the ad hoc teams, might be able to add a little bit more.
Thanks for that handoff. Director Batchelor, no, I think there's also a trade-off between the city doing the work to provide sufficient reliability to give people the confidence that they can move over to electricity completely. But just in case, you might want to spend a whole lot of, frankly, extra money on something that will work for a little period of it. It's a little bit of a tough message. And so I don't disagree that we should provide this information to folks. I mean, obviously we don't want people doing a generator, right? But I think that, from a policy perspective, it's interesting to think about our sort of twin goals. And one is to make sure the whole system is reliable so that everyone feels comfortable moving. And then another, of course, is to be sure that, in unique situations or, situations where people just can't tolerate an outage even of an hour, that they have the information they need to make that decision. Yeah. And we'll see what happens next year if there's an ad hoc. We've also asked the staff to come back and describe what it might look like if we created a commission around our climate work. Because, it's no secret, we've had this discussion before that, there isn't a complete overlap of the climate work with the UAC, and there's a lot of work to be done in both areas. So, I'm sure you'll all pay attention to that next year as it goes forward.
Any other commissioner comments right now?
And this is the final figure from the analysis, which is looking at a specific, mostly electrified already multifamily unit, and then the costs and savings of adding a 10 kilowatt solar PV and essentially a Powerwall battery system to it. And after, and again, I believe after the time period considered, these are the savings, assuming, certain escalations in natural gas costs and electricity. So, and, it was, since multifamily units are not owned in general, the one that we looked at was not owned by the residents, and looking at, was there something that could be cost effectively, worked with the owner of the building on that and examining that. And that might be an area where the utility might need more of a role.
I had one question. There was also some discussion in here about using like a library or some other city community center as a backup. I don't know, I get a community power backup in some kind of major outage. And would those costs be similar to this, like a multifamily community room?
I would have to do the analysis. I don't have an idea. In general, the utilization I would think would be lower. So they'd have less savings day to day. So it might not pan out as attractively, but just really depends. Really, really depends.
Any other questions right now? Do you have more of your presentation?
No, I did create one backup slide just to highlight the error that we found after this became publicly noticed. So, these are the two systems that, the amount of backup power they could provide in those different outages and the percentage of loads covered are here. And so assuming that you have separate inverters or a big enough inverter to so that both your battery and your solar can feed your load at the same time, then the level of reliability from both the solar and storage systems would be higher than is reflected in those. And the one place it shows up is in the winter bar graphs, and it would be higher there. So I just wanted to have that on the record.
Commissioner Metz.
Yes, well, first of all, Dr. Perkins, thanks for an excellent report. I thought this really brought out some important information. In particular, speaking in terms of a major emergency like an earthquake, I think what's particularly noteworthy is the very high value, low cost of a solar PV system with a grid forming inverter. Even without storage. With storage is great, but even without that, I think, it shows if you don't have 10, as you said, if you don't have 10 stormy days in a row, even in the winter, you could generate about, 10 kilowatt hours per day, which would be enough to, sort of keep somebody afloat with a bit of lighting and communication access and so on. Also, I thought the examination of multifamily common areas was really important because we wrestled with, how to address those kinds of needs. So I think, this very basic, simple system could help achieve what, and you've been in some of the discussions with Office of Emergency Services of enabling people to stay in their homes for, a week or two without help from anybody else. I think this does an important job of that. And then the question is, okay, what can we do about it? And if we're not talking about, subsidizing people doing this, it sort of drops down perhaps to education. And so, I think, and with some discussions with OES, that a thought would be to develop a kind of spec for what would be the basic system that would keep people afloat through an emergency. I've actually tried to find out the answer to that with my own solar, photovoltaic system. So far, don't have an answer. But I think, kind of defining a spec, what would be the minimum credible system? Because I'm guessing that most systems don't do, are not grid forming. So if the grid goes down, they're down. And I'm guessing that most of the people who own those systems don't know that that's going to happen to them. So, having, as was talked about before, having some education, but getting more specific and engineering-ish, actually having spec for what a system needs to have to enable somebody to stay afloat, and then communicating that to PV system owners, and also perhaps providing some kind of resource to communicate with owners and installers, maybe a sort of clearinghouse, because the installers, obviously that's their business to be installing these systems. So it seems like it could be valuable for everybody. And I'm not quite sure how to get that started, but it seems like it'd be low cost and high value and something to look into trying to do with CPA, the utility involvement. So thanks again, and thank Mr. Iskander also.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Thank you for this report. I guess I did want to highlight the goal of education. I know, like on the OES website, there's a list of what to have for emergency, and it might be an interesting place to have some education there, at least as a minimum, before we can embark on any kind of educational program. Certainly to put something there might be a nice start. I realize AC, but to get the conversation going is helpful. And I do also worry that people with solar don't realize that they won't have it when the system is down. And then, for another day, I guess it's worth thinking about what really would be needed. I personally don't think it's realistic to have a refrigerator running for 2 weeks, if that's what we're talking about. And if you go to sort of what supplies one needs, it's things like, canned food and pasta. I don't think, they're thinking about a lot of refrigerated necessary food, putting aside people who have other health needs for refrigeration. So I think what Commissioner Forcell said about what a house really needs would be very interesting to see. I mean, people backpack without power for long periods of time. Anyway, thank you. This is a great report. Really interesting.
Yeah, Keola Iskander was a great fellow. So I'll make sure that he watches the back half or the back 5 minutes of this to hear all the praise.
Thank you. I guess we can take a quick, maybe we'll go on one more to item 3 before we take a break. The presentation and update on the city's electric grid modernization analysis. I think we have at least one comment from the community. Do we have more than one?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone.
Do you have anyone online?
I see no hands raised. Hamilton Hitchings is here in person to speak on item 3.
Comment. I'm not convinced necessarily on the cost benefit of undergrounding, except in like the foothills, because it's much harder to it's much more expensive and it's harder to diagnose where the problems are and to fix them. And we saw this with the fiber analysis where it was much harder even for fiber. I do think we should accelerate electric poles, which are more resilient and also don't catch fire, unlike our regular poles. There's also a cost. When I was talking to Tom Dubois, he also mentioned that during the fiber, there's a disproportionate cost sharing on fiber as opposed to electric for the poles. And so if you switch that around and make sure that electric is paying for the appropriate cost, it may actually make the financials for fiber more attractive. But I do think we should move ahead with electric and help pay for it with the poles, electric poles, the metal poles. The next thing is on electrification. Utility policies and fees on electric panel upgrades strongly discourage residential electrification. I know, I just went through this. You can only upgrade to 225 amps. After that, you need to upgrade to 400 amps, which risks the $10,000 fee, which Lisa has mentioned, and can take a much longer cycle. The problem is, if you're a double working family and you want 2 electric cars and you want to be able to charge them quickly, you need 50 amps per electric car for the charger. So that's 100 amps. And most new houses or just even existing houses, you're going to want 200 amps. So that means most houses in Palo Alto are going to want 300 amps, but they're only allowed to have 225 unless they risk this $10,000 fee. So essentially, you put this giant obstacle in the path of electrification. So I have 3 recommendations. One, as fast as possible, remove that $10K residential fee. I understand why they did it. Somebody was really proud of themselves for saving money, but that needs to be removed and it needs to be moved under infrastructure. Second, pre-order the transformers. This idea that it takes 1 to 2 years to get the transformer and put that in the critical path is ridiculous. I'm sure it's not that bad, but that's what it sounded like when I read the packet. And 3, change it from 225 to 300 amps so that you can get 200 amps the way today I can get 225. And so I'm planning on getting an electric car in January or March and then putting in a panel to support it. And I'm going to have to undersize that panel because of the current utility policies. So I think that would be really helpful for everyone who wants to electrify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Siegel, I have a hand raised on Zoom. Miss Sherry Linsgarden. Sorry, followed by David Cole.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So one, I just wanted to say quickly in response to Hamilton, I'm not convinced anybody needs more than 200 amps. So it would be good. I really do think that we all need to be more cognizant of our power usage and have, low, steady amounts of power and not be running every high powered appliance all the time, at the same time. So I think some education on that would be really useful. But I wanted to get back to somebody was talking about coordinating EV charging. One, I remember this was a couple of years ago, Juicebox was handing out chargers to utilities and saying, you can give these to your houses for free, and then we will run a virtual power plant or whatever over these chargers. I feel like there must be software to coordinate charging that you could purchase that would cost a fraction of whatever everything else is costing. And people could, you could incentivize people to opt into it. And then if they need to charge in an emergency, they can opt out. But otherwise, it keeps everybody at, 20 amps or 10 amps, and it adjusts, who's charging when. I don't know, I think it's really worth looking at that. Maybe start off calling Enelex, I guess, owns Juicebox now, or I think there's a company in San Jose also. I don't know if you guys have looked at this, but I would look at that. Just like some kind of smart, give everybody a charger that's opted into this coordination system. I'm making it up, but I think it should exist. All right, that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Liscarton. And the next speaker?
Next speaker is Mr. David Cole.
Hello, Council, UAC. Thanks for taking my comments. I echo the same comments that Sherry was talking about in terms, and respectively disagree with the first speaker. There's plenty of room in a 200 amp panel to electrify a house, and having a steeper cost would help people stay within a reasonable electric budget. EV chargers don't have to be 50 amps to be sufficient for almost all people's driving. The other comment would be whether it's for resiliency or for supporting the grid. If you do a quick look at the numbers, there's 250 megawatt hours in EV battery storage already paid for by the residents that's out there that's not being used. Now, it's true that we don't have vehicle to grid yet, but this should be part of the planning, both for resiliency and for our grid. If the utility is going to subsidize anything, it would be these bidirectional chargers, and that they would substantially reduce the load on transformers in problem neighborhoods. And you could also run a house for days. The minimum load you need for a house is about 1 kilowatt, and that includes the refrigerator, some lights, and the internet. And for most situations, that's going to get people by. So I think that calculation should be redone on that. The other issue is all of these things will get cheaper with the Inflation Reduction Act, which probably wasn't factored into any cost either in the previous session or item or in grid electrification upgrades. So I think there's some things that the city could do to really help out, especially if they look at vehicle to grid or vehicle to home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Are there any other comments from the public?
I see no other hands raised.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners, council members. I'm Tom Marshall, Assistant Director of Electric Engineering and Operations. And I was going to give an update on the grid modernization. So these slides are a little bit dated because I think we've moved this many times through this meeting. So the consultant, we actually got the draft report last week. focus of the first portion of that report was to take a look at grid capacity and give us recommendations on what needs to be upgraded on the grid itself. And I think there's some figures that have been out there before about what it's going to take to upgrade the grid. As you know, costs have gone up. And so we're seeing costs to be a little bit higher than, or maybe significantly higher than what we had seen before. So anyway, we're going to be coming back with those details. I don't have all of them today and we haven't reviewed it all. So I'm not going to put some numbers out today, but there are going to be some significant costs to upgrade the grid to get capacity out there on the grid itself. So the main changes, we've talked about this before as well. We're going to have to upgrade distribution transformers. And the other part of that is the secondary system serving customers. There's also some costs with some of our older substations where we're going to have to convert some of our 4 kV to 12 kV. And when we're doing that, we'll have to upgrade some substation capacity at a couple of our substations on the system. So we also got some recommendation on what the load is going to look like per home. In aggregate, at peak, diversified load. And it's coming about where we originally estimated about 6 kVA per home for our design. And I'll just say that, I mean, the part that we're designing for is not everyday usage. We're designing for peak demand based on conditions that are unusual conditions out there. Could be emergency conditions, could be other. On a typical day, we don't see that level of demand. But when we're designing this system, we have to put enough capacity out there to serve customers during emergency or unusual conditions. So current impacts. So we're already seeing the impacts of electrification in the new building applications we see coming in. I would say today we're seeing about 3/4 of the new panels going in are 400 amps and about maybe 2/3 are 400 amp and 1/3 are 200 or 225 amps. So we are seeing the impacts of people planning for electrification when they're replacing their panels and putting in new homes. And we also are seeing a number of 600 amp requests from customers. Yeah, I'll just say there's some large homes and they have some large loads. People are looking at doing maybe heat pumps for a swimming pool or some other things. And that really pushes the load up on the system or for that particular home. We're seeing, more transformer upgrades. We did recently get an order of transformers in from orders we made last year. I think we got around 23 larger transformers in. They're in the yard. We've placed orders for the next year to come in. A lot of these new homes are in the beginning process. They don't actually come online for 6 months or a year or longer. So these upgrades we're seeing to 400 amps are probably not going to show up until next year, late next year sometime on the system. I guess another thing is we're seeing there's more and more load going on the system today that we don't have visibility in. Things like they come in and replace their water heaters and they put in electric resistive water heating. They may make multiple units in the house. They don't come to the electric utility because they're permitted over the counter and they're not reviewed through the utility unless it results in a panel upgrade. But if we don't have a panel upgrade, we don't see those. And we're also seeing the impacts of all the electric vehicles. It's not a great, huge problem right now, but it's starting, we're seeing more and more loading coming on the system and having some impact on other customers. The other part is that we're seeing a lot of battery storage systems coming on today. A lot of the solars are incorporating battery storage with that. And so that causes us planning problems as well, because we have to plan also for cases where the batteries may charge off the utility system. And a lot of them don't. The Tesla batteries don't charge off the system today, but that has to do with their the subsidies they get for these systems, they had to make them so they didn't charge off the utility system. But in the future, those could be converted back. And I've seen lots of on their blog about customers asking, how do I get these so they charge off the utility system? So again, as we're planning, we got to plan for the worst case. We can't plan for the best case when we build the system out. And then the last part I'll just mention, and this is where the program is, where we're subsidizing, not subsidizing, but encouraging people to move to the heat pumps because of that's the least impact on the grid today, just because they're not large loads. And that's something that fails regularly in homes are the water heating. So that's being promoted now. So, the constraints are upgrading the grid. So we are beginning plans how we're going to upgrade the grid. And we probably going to be running a first trial project on grid upgrades probably next year sometime. We're planning right now to figure out where we're going to do that. It's probably going to be in the 4 kV areas of our system that are extremely old. We're going to try to upgrade those and convert them and get them ready for electrification. Transformer replacement. So one of the keys is getting transformers. We're trying to order in advance now. The lead times now are about a year or a little more. A lot of people are now getting transformers from overseas. I think South Korea is now a place where a lot of the transformers are coming from today. Let's see. So the other part is just staffing. And we're continuing to recruit staff. We have, I think I have 3 recent graduates that are in the department that have come in, but we are very short on experienced staff. So we're spending a lot of time getting the new staff up to speed. At the present time, we have 3 probably experienced engineers on staff. We're having the difficulty, obviously, finding experienced engineers that want to come work in Palo Alto, and that continues to be a problem. And then we have a backlog of infrastructure projects that we have already from pole replacements, and we have 2 large customer requests for large amounts of power that we have to rebuild existing substations to supply. And our staff is having to deal with those projects as well. So our steps now are analyzing and prioritizing feeders and then substations that require upgrades. So we are doing that initial development. And like I mentioned, we're looking at focusing on the 4 kV because that needs to be rebuilt anyway. So we're going to come in and try to run a pilot project there for that. One of the things we have to do is coordinate between the programs that are going out into the community and the places where we're trying to incent people to switch to electrification. I think coming up as we start developing out these upgrade plans, we need to start matching them up where we have customers that want to electrify and coordinate in those neighborhoods to try to incent people to move to electrification in the areas where we have capacity to take care of it. And again, just coordinating where areas where we have adequate capacity out there. And again, we're talking about engineering operations staff. I already mentioned that we are very short on staff, not just in engineering, but also in operations as well. And I think as we move into grid modernization, we will need to have increases in staffing to manage all the contracting work we're going to have in town that has to be managed as the system gets upgraded. Yeah, so that's I don't really have much. I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So I just wanted to open it up for questions that you might have.
Commissioner Metz?
Yeah. Mr. Marshall, one of the things that you talked about, and obviously face in terms of, particularly in terms of staffing and being able to order equipment, particularly transformers and so on. What can we do to help?
Well, I'll say, I mean, the city's in the middle of a negotiation process with the unions and the staff. So I think that's in process. I don't know that I really can comment on that because it's sort of in process, but certainly compensation and other things that are competitive in this area are important to us being able to attract and retain employees.
I mean, speaking for myself, it'd be helpful to have, proposed solutions or partial solutions that we might be able to help you advance with city council and so on.
Yes, yeah. I think the difficulty right now, like I say, negotiations are ongoing with the city. And so I think that's,
I also had one technical question. You talked about EVs mostly as a load, right? As a load that could be an unpleasant one. It just strikes me that as we're talking about very long-term planning, and this applies to the next presentation as well, that the grid of tomorrow that we're planning and building is going to be quite a bit different from the grid of today, particularly in having local resources, demand management, distributed local resources, some renewable, maybe some not, including bidirectional charging with EVs. I don't see any of that discussed. And so I guess it's a sort of two-part question. Do you agree that those are going to be increasingly important factors in designing the grid? And if so, what are we doing about it?
So I should have carried on with my first part of the discussion. So the first part we got was capacity. What we're expecting to get in the next part of the study is the integration of more sophisticated systems to run the distribution network, including how you would integrate batteries into the system, advanced protection schemes that we might use to make the grid more reliable. That's sort of the next piece. We're moving ahead sort of with this capacity piece because that's the part we have to start on as early as possible because it takes the longest time to implement. Some of these other things we're talking about are, a lot of it is immature technology. It's starting to come into the marketplace today, and we're seeing people starting to run some pilot programs around these, but I don't know that they're ready for a full deployment with the thought that I'm going to relieve the need for capacity on the grid. I don't think that technology is ready, but we are planning to incorporate that into the grid. And how we're going to do that's going to come in the next part of this study that we're doing.
When does that happen? Because it seems like many of the discussions we have here are about decisions that were made, equipment that was installed decades ago. And so, presumably people 10, 20 years from now are going to be talking about decisions that we make.
Correct. And I think, like I say, we were going to incorporate those technologies are going to be incorporated into the grid design as we go forward. Some of these seem like they shouldn't be that complex, but in terms of running the grid, there are some complex data analysis and communication that has to happen to actually run these systems on a grid-wide basis. And I would say that's coming. That's certainly going to be coming, probably not too far in the distant future, but it's not ready to implement on a full utility basis today.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner Forcell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I want to relate two presentations. First, Dr. Perkins' presentation on the solar homes that we talked about earlier. And then you say we're designing for a peak of 6 kVA per home. So if I take a look at an average home in Palo Alto of 12,400 kilowatts per year, that's on an annual basis, that's not peak. But if I take 7,000 out of that 12,400, then your peak comes down. Is that true?
So again, I think, are we mixing kilowatt hours
And that's what I'm
demand.
afraid I'm doing. Am I mixing kilowatt hours or am I reducing demand? Am I reducing the
so
peak?
I mean, many things will drive demand. So plugging in your, vehicle chargers all at the same time, or coming home after work, or maybe an outage on the system, which causes everything to want to come on at the same time. So that could be a demand on the system. And when we're planning, there's like an average on the system that you use every day, but that's not what we plan for. We plan for those times when the system gets stressed. And there's a variety of things that could cause that stress. So I guess that's what the
So I
point.
guess
So you're mixing,
I know I'm mixing,
Yeah.
but I think I'm drawing a conclusion that's valid. And that is that if I have a 7,000 kilowatt hour solar PV array on my home, and I'm using that for a significant portion of my load, even at peak, I reduce your assumption.
So
on an individual basis. Now, if I applied that to 26,000 residences, I reduce your peak.
you could, and again, it depends. So when does the peak happen on the system?
6 p.m. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean,
and so if you have battery storage, you could offset some of it, but you're not going to offset it with solar because the solar is not on.
no, you're not going to offset the solar, but you're going to offset the peak on the demand on CPAU.
Not if the peak demand's happening when the solar is not offsetting, only if it reduces.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So unless there's a battery system there that does that, solar is not operating because obviously there's no sun, especially at winter.
Correct.
Okay. I see that. Okay. Thank you. I guess my point is, and I know I'm belaboring and I know I am mixing, but my point is that I think we really do need to be creative when we're talking about spending this amount of money and taking this amount of time to implement these improvements. Yes, I absolutely agree they're necessary, but I think if we all acknowledge that technology can help us, particularly with respect to spreading load and managing that load and educating our neighbors with respect to when they charge their car, or even managing their car charging times as suggested by one of our callers, then I think we need to be creative in terms of how we design our new system.
So I guess the point I would make with that is that if we don't have, if it's a system we don't have control over, I can't manage that piece. So there could be a system that we do have control over, and then we can actually manage the load in a way that we can guarantee that we don't overload systems out there. That's going to take a little time before that's ready to do, and whether customers are actually willing to have the utility controlling their load is yet another item that has to be looked at. So, I mean, I don't agree sort of with the assumptions, but thinking that people are all going to go along and do these things, I think that's the part that we have to think about, and how we're going to manage those systems if we put them out there, and whether people are accepting of the utility managing people's loads. And I don't have answers to those questions, really.
I don't think any of us do.
Yeah. So, as we're developing something, again, I have to have something that's going to work for people. And that may come along, but it's going to take, years to sort of upgrade the grid. If we start in thinking one thing and then we find that technology or something changes what we do, we can always back off and do something different at that point in time. But we have to start somewhere trying to get that grid upgraded.
Thank you. Yeah. Much appreciated.
You said something in passing that caught my interest, and I just wanted to ask about it. And it's going to sound like a loaded question, and I really don't mean it to be. It's genuine curiosity. You mentioned that there are 3 large customers with big power demands that are going to require re-engineering a substation or something like that. How does the utility, and that's placing demand on our limited engineering resources, how does the utility prioritize what the limited staff is going to spend its time on? Is there a conscious decision that that these 3 customers get to use all the engineering time versus grid modernization efforts, or is that just how it goes?
So, so typically what we focus on first are customer requests. To be honest, customers come in, they request services, could be for electrification, could be for a number of different things. And so typically our priority is on providing customers with load and service is typically our number 1 priority. Some of that's going to help electrification when they come in. We are providing that service to them. What's typically falling off the table as we do that is some of our CIP, just because we don't have staff to do all that CIP. We are using more contractors. In one of these cases I'm talking about, we're working with the customer to actually do all the engineering and installation for a large substation upgrade.
Sorry, the customer is doing the engineering installation in the substation? Did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah. So we're working on a way to do that. But even that, it still takes staff time. So, but we aren't going to be doing all the engineering part of it. We're going to have the customer manage part of that. Or at least that's what we're proposing. It's not a done deal, but we are looking into figuring out how we can get these things done with the very limited staff that we have. And we do continue to use contractors, so to assist us. So.
Thanks. That answers my question. I guess it's a reminder to the UAC where we tend to be very focused on residential customers, but it's a reminder that commercial customers are what, 80 or 90% of our load. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? One thing you commented on was that over-the-counter permits aren't getting captured into the demand on transformers. And I'm wondering whether there is an easy fix for that, like once a month you get a report or something that helps you understand what the upcoming additional load is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we eventually get those things. I mean, be honest with you, with the limited staff we have, we don't have time to go back through all the things that have happened over the counter development center. You know, and there's more and more push to move more and more things to over the counter. I think the latest, there's some legislation by the state that's going to require over the counter for battery storage systems as well. So, you know, as we get more staff, we may be able to look at those, you know, more regularly, but just to be honest with you, we just don't have staff to go back and review all those things after the fact. In the past, we had to approve them on the front end. So we would be able to look at them at the front end, but since we're not seeing them on the front end anymore, they happen out there and, you know, we don't necessarily see them.
Well, it seems to me, and maybe we should be, you know, talking to permitting, but it seems to me that should be some simple tool. If anything is computerized, there's just like an added box that just says load or something. I don't know, because that seems like a big blind spot that sounds like it's becoming a problem and is likely to be a bigger problem down the road as more's over the counter. And so maybe that's something. It seems like it's an easy fix, or there's just like a weekly report that totals a load or something. I understand going through every permit is a lot of time, but maybe there's something on the front end or the permit itself that has a box.
I mean, there's things that can be done by connecting some of the systems, doing this together. Again, it's a matter of taking the time to develop the programming and aggregate things and associate them with the proper transformer. So those things have to be done. And, you know, I think we'll be developing those in the future. We're getting more staff, so we may be able to to give them that task to move ahead.
If I could add, I think the other thing is that, we don't know what's loaded on that transformer at this period of time. Unless we're actually going to physically go out there and take a look at it. And as Tom mentioned, so maybe it's out there and look at that portion of it. So we're really not going to know that. But as Tom mentioned, as we move forward with making this grid more modern, I think one of the things that will help us is definitely going to be the AMI portions of it, because it'll tell us a little bit more. And then there's also, as Tom mentioned, is that there's some cutting edge technology that is coming out that would be able to pull that report or look at that transformer and actually see what the load really is, almost like looking at your home and looking at your meter. So I think the technology will be there where we won't have to actually go out there and look ahead of time to see if it's going to be okay or not okay.
Okay, as you're talking, I realize it's a little more complicated than just knowing the load, because you have to know which transformer is actually taking that out of.
Right, and to just add on just the same point Director Batchelor is making is we don't actually know what the loads are on that transformer today. We are just estimating what they might be based on the kilowatt hours used in a month. So we might think it's okay, but we could have one of these times where everybody turned everything on at the same time. It doesn't show up in the monthly usage, but it may actually be happening on the transformer that we just don't have any visibility in.
And then on that note about the amount of load, when you're working with these consultants to come up with the future system, and you're trying to estimate peak demand, are there assumptions that are built in, like how many homes will be electrified? Is it 100% of the homes? Is it so many EVs per home? Whether businesses are electrifying are there pretty generous estimates in that regard?
So in general, we're looking for, in residential, we're looking at what full electrification would look like and planning for that. And we did, look at business as well to figure out, what increases we might be seeing from business for the electrification on those sites. I mean, as we mentioned in the past, some of the electrification at the businesses is not as impactful as it is on the residential, because there's usually more capacity because they have large air conditioning systems and other things already there. So the load increase isn't as much. The one sort of thing we don't know is vehicle charging and how much vehicle charging, and that's sort of another something that's going to be coming up. Typically on a large commercial customer, we're going to be installing a new transformer, a new system just to supply the vehicle charging.
And then one last, I think the answer is yes, but I feel like I need to ask anyway. When you said that it's hard to get engineers to work in Palo Alto, I assume it's the cost of living relative to compensation and not something else. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that the main reason is cost of living in Palo Alto.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? I know Council Member Cormac.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. Well, Assistant Director Marshall, it looks like you've made some progress since the last time you shared slides with us, so I want to acknowledge that. I'm not an electrical engineer, so all the kilowatts, volts, hours, I'm definitely sure I've got those wrong in the amps, et cetera. But you were designing the system for 6 what?
kVA or kilowatts, I guess.
kV per house.
Correct.
Okay. Is that at all connected with the 600 amps, or it's a different thing?
Excuse me, sorry.
Is that at all connected with the 600 amps panels that people are putting in?
Well, so 6 kVA is not actually a large, I guess, load. I would have to back calculate how many amps that is, but it's not a lot of amps.
Okay.
Probably less than 100 amps.
This is the difference between what you use and how fast you use it?
Yeah, so it
Great.
has to do with the aggregation and diversity of load out there on the system. Any one house, you had 10 people on a transformer, you could have somebody using 20 and then 4 or 5 people are using 1 or 2
Got it.
kVA. So when you aggregate that all out, today we use 2 to 3. We believe it's going to be around 6 in the future.
And I know there's going to be a lot of discussion on this, and some of my colleagues feel strongly that we should not be maximizing any system. And we certainly hear comments from members of the public that there should be an average and people should be on a diet. So let's see if we can broaden this conversation a little bit. What are other municipal utilities looking at? Are they also assuming 6 kV? I realize we're a little bit ahead of the game, but we're not that far ahead of the game. Like, what is the industry thinking around this? So we stop having this, I think, existential and unresolvable disagreement about whether people will spend a lot of time managing their electrical budget, or whether there will be a disaster and everybody's going to turn on everything at once and we need to maximize.
Yeah, so there's always a balance between all that. So I would say that, what we know, like there was a study, part of the data we relied on was a study done in by Los Angeles Department of Power.
Okay.
And so our numbers are very similar to what they came from in a large study that they did. As far as local places, we've talked with Roseville. We know they use 6 kVA per home. That's what they're using. That's before electrification because they have large air conditioning loads there. So at this point, we don't think 6 kVA per home is excessively high.
It's not oversized.
It's not excessively oversized. Again, I mean, we're
comfortably oversized.
I mean, we're designing for we have to design for the worst case. We're not designing for the average load.
And I think that's an important point, and that is continuing to be debated, and so perhaps not fully understood. So whatever it is that we can collectively do to, think through what you have to do for the system versus what an individual might be willing to do in their home. I think that's an important thing. Okay. So that's the 6 kV number is not something that we have conservative. I'm not going to say made up, right? There's some data behind it and comparable. Okay. Helpful. Now I'm on slide 6 and you're indicating that there's no staffing to manage this program. Is that because you don't have a position, or is that because no one's in the position?
So I think it's both. We're still looking to fill positions. And when we get into the system capacity increases, we're going to need additional staff to manage all the work that's going to be going on.
Yeah, well, that doesn't freak me out at all because there's a mid-year budget coming and then there'll be a new budget. And I fully hope and expect that the utilities department will ask for all the positions they need to make progress on this. Which brings me to my final series of questions. Now I'm on slide 5 and, there's these steps for modernization you're talking about. Can you give us a sense of the timeframes? Because it's great that we've got the study started and maybe this first part of the study is finished, but when would you anticipate each of these things on slide 5 happening?
So I'm expecting to get the first part of next year. We'll be getting that data back. So you'll maybe like March. I'm speculating we would have the rest of this scoped out.
So you'll know the priority of the feeders and the substations. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. And refresh my memory. I'm not even sure we've had a whole bunch of numbers flying around over the past year. So I'd say any sense of the duration of the program
for
complete?
Okay.
When do we get to cut the cake and
so I think when we
celebrate?
Celebrate. We'll have many celebrations in small pieces.
Okay, that sounds positive, but I'm looking for the one when the program's done.
Yeah, so I think, and again, I'm spitballing a little bit because we haven't gone out to see how much, how many resources we can actually get into Palo Alto to actually come in and do construction and contracting work here. So that will come as we go out to bid for the work and whether there's actually resources to do it. But I do believe you could get the residential neighborhoods done within about 5 years.
Oh, that was what I was hoping to hear. Okay, that's 5 years from March.
We'll let you know. No.
Dean's shaking his head.
Yeah.
It's really important, though, to have this level of conversation. Because we have to map whatever it is we're asking people to change when they're changing it, not just where they live. Sounds promising. What do you think, Director Batchelor? Are you going to throw out a number for us?
I think, as Tom mentioned, I think it's a 5-year program, and I think it's 2030. Because I think by the time that we get this next study done, by the time we put off an RFP, knowing what the timeline on how long it takes to do that, it looks like I'm predicting maybe the start of 25, first quarter, second quarter, 25, we start. And as Tom mentioned, by that time, we'll have pretty much a full design. We'll know where we need to go, what we need to do up and do the upgrades in residential. So I think the electrification portion could be completed in the residential areas by that time.
Well, this is much better news than the last time we went through these slides, because that's what our plan is, and it sounds like we're going to be able to support the plan. Okay, thanks so much.
I did one follow-up because in the 2 years while we're doing the large plan, as I understand it, we will be accelerating upgrades generally, right?
Yes. I mean, there are upgrades going on anyway because people are still electrifying homes. So there's upgrades going today. But we are going to be kicking off smaller pilot to begin the process earlier. But eventually we're going to be having to go out with very large construction contracts to go out into the neighborhoods and, tear stuff apart, cause them, service disruptions and upgrade all of the equipment out there. It's going to be disruptive as we go through that process. And it's going to be a lot of work.
It's sounding a lot like grade separation, to be honest with you. Expensive, disruptive, and yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. I guess we'll take about a 10-minute break now. Come back at 8:10 or 8:11, I guess. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll now turn to the fourth item on the agenda, discussion of City of Palo Alto Utilities long-term electric load forecast through 2045. Do we have any public comments?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 4, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. I have one hand raised, Mr. David Cole, followed by Hamilton Hitchings, who's here in person.
Great, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, commissioners. I am hoping that in your long-term forecasts, modernization of the grid is taken into account for the years that you're covering. The vehicle to grid and all sorts of other things, as mentioned by other commissioners, will be standard practice. So we need to take that into account in how that we run our grid. Also, the loads will probably be substantially less in the future. Even with electrification, they could be much less than has been predicted now. So I'm hoping the report shows that. It does in some extent, but these are a lot of things to consider when looking at the grid at this long range portion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Next, Hamilton Hitchings.
I'm on the Housing Element Working Group for the city, and we just are wrapping up our plan, which is supposed to add 6,000 new housing units in the next 8 years. When I quickly scanned the packet, I didn't see a mention of that when they were modeling. They were looking at the past projections and then taking into account things like electrification. But I didn't see anything in there, and I may have missed it, projecting an increased rate of house building. Now, I don't think there'll actually be 6,000 because half of those are supposed to be subsidized, and there's very little money for subsidized housing. But there should be at least 3,000 new housing units built. And so I question the model and whether it underpredicted based on not anticipating the new models. And remember, all those houses are electric. And as Mr. Marshall said, 2/3 of the people are now requesting 400 amps. So this idea that everybody's going to have like really low amperage and they're going to manage it and be managing it isn't the reality today. Today, the majority of houses are requesting 400 amps per house. And certainly for these electric houses, which are all electric, they're going to have higher requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
I see no other hands raised.
Thank you. Dr. Perkins, do you have another presentation?
Yes, again, I just have a brief presentation walking through the figures, and please feel free to ask questions at any time. I will acknowledge the last public comment referring to 3,000 new homes, all electric new homes being built over the next 8 years, and say that, there are many uncertainties in all forecasts, and this is a snapshot in time. And as we see, we will have lead time as we see housing being permitted and constructed in order to procure sufficient electricity that meets our carbon neutral electric portfolio standards. And so, we will absolutely roll that in, and forecasts are updated fairly frequently, and these long range forecasts are updated every 5 years. All right. So, this is a graph of what we have seen for the actual annual energy usage in the solid blue line since 2004. And then the dotted line is a linear trend on top of that. And this speaks to the linear regression that we are using based on the past. And then we are exogenously adding on both additional commercial loads, additional electric vehicle loads that are not adequately captured in the linear regression, and then additional building electrification, which essentially none of it has occurred to date, in a meaningful way that would impact the baseline regression. So this load forecast is out to 2045 because it is a requirement of the integrated resource plan that we will be submitting, which we do every 5 years, to go out to 2045. And there are very high levels of uncertainty for anything in 2045. And so while we are required to project out this far, and we definitely want to capture sort of the range of possibilities out that far, we are more focused on the next 5 to 10 years in terms of building out our electric portfolio of projects, and being more accurate for those years, and being sure to meet our carbon neutral electric portfolio standard. Feel free to stop me. This is a breakdown of the three different scenarios for the low, mid, and high projection and their electrification load assumptions. And this, I think, if I were going to spend time on any slide, we want to make sure we understand this. These are the assumptions for additional EV load, as well as building electrification load, building electrification load in the mid scenario, and then additional commercial loads, which are called data center loads here, but it's not just data centers coming on. So, and yeah, that is my last slide.
Any commissioner comments or questions? Commissioner Forcell?
Sorry, super quick, small question on figure 2 building load assumptions. What's a gas pack?
Yeah, this, and I apologize for the naming on some of these, but yeah, this is assuming that the gas pack is a rooftop heating unit that can be easily replaced by, a heat pump, like swapping out where you already have a sufficient electric load that they have rooftop units for the AC. And if you swap out a heat pump for that, you don't need the gas part of the heating unit. So
is it fair to call it a commercial HVAC upgrade?
Yes, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or comments?
So I gather that the purpose of this is just so we can be thinking about what additional resources or whether we need additional resources. And I know that we're going to have a discussion coming up. It gets into the informational report that you gave us, which I really thought was very interesting about, we've got hydro contracts coming up. We've got solar power that we're talking about laying off and trying to match our resources with the load. This is the load side of that equation. All right.
Yes, correct. And we do have hourly load shapes associated to this going out to 2045. And so knowing what our hourly load shape is now, and then breaking it into these large groups of EV and building electrification and additional commercial load, helps us modify those hourly load shapes for the whole city going forward. So we can also look at our exposure on an hourly basis.
So I think this is really helpful background, but I'm looking forward to the discussion about the, how we're gonna meet these loads. Thank you.
Commissioner Metz.
Yes, I had one question which sort of builds on that one. In this chart, one thing you see is that the traditional, so-called traditional loads are, flat to down a little bit in all cases. So all the new load is coming from electrification, EVs, and data centers. Is all commercial, you said? Okay, so it's coming from those things. So is there a plan to have a plan for how to guide and influence those loads in the future?
Influence how? I'm not sure I'm grasping the question.
Either diurnally or seasonally, or
how to shape these
long-term
loads.
secular growth to, make it easier and less costly to modernize the grid, which could be as simple as pricing or, time of day.
Yeah, the time of use, it will be the primary mechanism. The time of use rate will be the primary mechanism for influencing the shape, the hourly shape of the loads at this point.
So would demand management, for example, be a part of that?
There is a program at the state level for customers to opt in to an ISO managed demand response program that can benefit the grid, which we may opt into and facilitate opting into that in the next couple of years. In general, our load factor is quite high as a city. So the shaping is more important for the distribution system than it is for the wholesale markets part of it for the whole city, where the hourly shape of the whole city is much flatter than the hourly shape of the residential sections. And so, the residential sections are the areas where some sort of demand management could be helpful in the short term, more than mitigating much, or more than adding much value at the city level for benefit on the wholesale grid side of things.
Okay, I think I understood that. So demand management then would apply mostly in residential. Oh, demand management would apply mostly on the residential side, you're saying?
Yeah, mostly on the residential side and mostly for whatever benefit it gives to the distribution system, not because again, it's the distribution system is sort of a higher cost to mitigate than the transmission and generation side. And we're already, once you average all the homes together and all the residential sector and all the commercial sector, we already have a pretty favorable flat load shape, for the city. So there's just limited value today and going forward for a period of time in terms of lowering our demand in certain hours.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Commissioner Bowie.
Yes. On the EV load curve projections, are those accounting for, in past presentations, we've talked about it where it was EV registrations in the city of Palo Alto. Are these load curves accounting for transient or commuter loads as well?
Yes, they are accounting for transient and commuter loads. And they are, that is the part of the load forecast for EVs that has the most uncertainty, because we don't have a great inventory of those folks coming in and then how much they're charging. The research across the board says that 80% of charging happens at home. And so they are not adding as much as one might think. And that with longer range batteries, more and more of that charging could stay or shift to home, which is, you can have a debate over whether, that's preferable since daytime charging is cleaner.
Okay, and then so a follow-up question on those projections too. The EV market is, I think all of us are aware, rapidly changing and picking up as much more affordable vehicles come online. Is the projection here based on a regression that goes, how far back does that regression go? Does it account for like GM suddenly introducing all sorts of new, much more affordable vehicles that may be used by populations who are multifamily and not charging at home, and are using transient sources and things? Or is it a backcast or a forecast of new, an EV market pickup that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, this is a forecast, and that's why it showed outside of the gray regression essentially. And so this is, very, very aggressive nonlinear growth. And just for context, the SCAP goals for EVs are what is represented in the blue in the high scenario, and in the mid scenario, we're assuming, sort of getting to 75% of the SCAP goals. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I think that answers the questions. Thank you.
And I think in this, this is the total EV energy. So for context, all of the EVs coming into Palo Alto and living in Palo Alto are currently using the gigawatt hours that you can barely see in 2023. So we're talking about multiplying that times 70, essentially. And that's what the table says too.
Can you say that one more time?
So maybe the table will be easier. The actual electric vehicles today commuting in and living here are estimated to be adding 10 gigawatt hours. 10 gigawatt hours per year. And sorry, not 70, but they are going up by a factor of 13 over this period. So, considering that we already have 1 out of every 3 new vehicles being an EV, this is getting to really high penetrations of EVs in the future for both commuter vehicles and residential vehicles.
I have another question about data centers. We don't often talk about data centers, and I continue to be intrigued by the idea that there are some that want to locate here. Do we have any insight as to why they're choosing Palo Alto? Is it, for example, because of the quality and price point of power here in the city, or is that completely unrelated to the fact that we're getting this I don't know, applications or whatever they are, this sense that they're coming?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will just say for context that SVP is projecting their load going up by 2.5 times. So 250% for their entire load by 2035. So, and that's largely driven by data centers. So
that's the city of Santa Clara's municipal utility?
Yes.
You said 2.5 times current load.
Yeah. So
So 3 new data centers is not a big deal, is what you're trying to say.
Well, and we don't have visibility I don't have visibility of how data centers are being located in PG&E territory. And, I think that, if Director Batchelor wants to speak to the decisions here, I don't have any insight per se, but it's not commensurate with the load growth in Santa Clara is one thing I know.
I think the only thing I can add to that is that I think it's also real estate that's causing some of the push. Some of the some of the 3 are relocating. They're moving some large loads along with repurposing of some of the buildings in town. And so the one that Tom was talking a little bit about, this one company is actually rebuilding a campus. And so they're expanding that campus and they bought a new piece of an existing property. And it's actually going to be part of a test facility for them. And so we believe that there will be some large loads that will come out of that. The other one is just kind of on the drawing boards at this period of time. But again, along with the property at this point.
It's just part of the business is located here and they have a data centers and that's just how it goes.
Yep.
Because the other thing I guess I was wondering is it part of a larger national trend? Are there just more and more and more data centers and every utility is seeing increased data center? Is it blockchain? Is it something? Is there some larger trend that Palo Alto is just part of on this?
I'm not aware, and I don't have, but I am curious.
Yeah, I think the thing is that we wish they would more would come from a data center standpoint because it's a 24/7 non-manned operation, so there's not but we don't see.
Is this load we like as a city? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Data centers are great loads. I think that
revenue exceeds the cost
exceeds the
to
cost.
service it. Oh,
Exactly.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, you can think about it as the wires are your fixed costs and how much they use the wires are your revenue. And so the more that you're, more revenue per fixed cost, and that's what the load factor is representing as well. As a load factor is, basically what percentage are you using of your wires? And we have a high load factor as a city, but data centers improve it.
Councilmember Cormac.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. I am equally, if not more so intrigued than Commissioner Forcell about this because I sat through an awful lot of SCAP presentations and I don't know that we have discussed this before. And at the high end, that dwarfs everything else we're contemplating. I think the other place this might fit would be our economic development group. Right. So working with Mr. Guagliardo. And one of the things we're talking about also with the consultant whose name escapes me, who's working on the sort of what are industries we might want to target. Can't remember the name of the consultant, but they were in front of council at some point in the past 2 months talking about understanding the places where we're competitive with our neighbors and the places where we're not, and what sorts of economic development programs we might want to implement. I don't recall any discussion about using an overlay of our utilities. So if you have not already chatted with them, this might be a good opportunity to do so. Especially because I know there are some members of our community who feel quite strongly about the ratio of jobs, and to the extent that these are large spaces, but not creating a fair amount of traffic, people might be more amenable to them. So I encourage you to chat with Mr. Guagliardo and the consultant there and work this into the next SCAP meeting.
Great, thank you for that.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. We will move on to commissioner comments and reports from any meetings or events or informational reports. Any commissioner? I'll say that I did attend the One Water community meeting last night, and it continues to, the community continues to impress me with their ideas and the thought that's going into it. And actually, while there are a lot of differing opinions, which isn't surprising maybe, but there are a lot of converging opinions too in terms of priority. And I really look forward to seeing that continue.
Can you give any specifics of things that came out of it?
I don't know, Carl, if you want to, but I think in terms of priority, so water quality is quite appreciated here, at least with the participants who are, you know, maybe not a very fair cross-section of the community, but that was one that surprised me. I didn't think people had given as much thought to it as they had. And here, I thought. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I was interested to see. We did a live polling exercise with I think 6 different potential criteria and asked the participants to use a sliding scale between 1 and 10 for each criteria and how important they were to them to inform the weighting that will eventually apply to these water supply portfolios that will be developed. And cost was fairly low relative to the other criteria, which I found really interesting. But I do think, to Chair Siegel's point, a lot of the interested community members maybe have an environmental primary interest. And so maybe that's why Councilmember Cormac was in attendance as well, and did point out that cost was something that would be important to the current and future councils. And so, yeah, I'd like to, you know, we did a lot of outreach for these community events, and we had about 15 members of the public come, which is great, but certainly, you know, I wish we could have every person in Palo Alto chime in on how they would weight those criteria. So we just need to figure out what to do with those results.
Yeah, I guess that was interesting that sustainability scored higher than cost sensitivity, but again, it's not really a cross section. But it was interesting, and thanks for that. Okay, we can turn to future topics for the January 4th meeting.
Well, not necessarily for the January meeting, but as I mentioned earlier, I thought this informational update we were given on the electric supply portfolio was really interesting. And I noticed that it says that we've retained a consultant to rigorously model and analyze economics and portfolio fit of the options, and that the staff expects to return to the UAC in the coming months to present the results. So I was curious as to when you thought that was going to be ready to be presented, because it seems to me that it would fit very well with the topics that are tentatively scheduled for February: the geothermal contract and the Western Base Resource contract, and the COPT. I mean, those are all potential resource changes that we're talking about, and it seemed to me that fit in very well with this analysis that was is apparently underway.
Jim Stack, Senior Resource Planner. I've been working on the analysis on the load rebalancing portfolio rebalancing. I think the discussion in February that we're going to have around the geothermal contracts and the Western and COTP, those will be sort of preliminary kind of overviews of those topics. We've recently engaged a consultant to do sort of a more rigorous analysis of the rebalancing options, and they're just getting started kind of in the coming weeks. So we're expecting that work to be done by roughly March, and hopefully we'll be able to present that to you around April or thereabouts. That's kind of our current thinking on the timing.
Could I, at least in my mind, talking about the geothermal contract and the hydro contracts, you want to do that in the context of the overall resource picture. Be hard to, well, not hard, but harder to discuss them individually without that context.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that one. Yeah, so I think that's why the discussions in February will just kind of be to, reintroduce these topics, but avoid getting into the real nitty gritty of the analysis at that point. We'll kind of wait until the analysis is done in April or thereabouts for that discussion.
Right. I understand it takes time to do the analysis, but anyway, I think it's really important to do it, and I'm glad to see this underway. Thanks.
On the calendar, which is an update on the director's September 22 discussion on outages and maintenance. I think obviously that's important to everybody, and perhaps say in the next quarter to touch on that again, something like that, I'd suggest.
I seem to recall did we talk about getting a regular update on that?
We did. We talked about, we did talk about it, and we talked about that it would be in the quarterly reports, and that we would then start showing a graph of showing what each quarter would look like, and then we would put that into the quarterly report, and we can be glad to talk about it at that period of time when it comes back out. But it'll be out on in the quarterly reports.
Great, thanks. Any other items?
Just a small request drafting off of Commissioner Johnston's suggestion. Maybe it's as simple as, could we just include this informational report the next time it's an agendized item, so that we don't have any, just so that per Brown Act, we can talk about it? That would be my request.
So you would like to see that in the January meeting?
No, I think with
the
February, when we're
meeting?
talking about some of the specific contracts,
The contract.
if this sort of can be included in our reading material. Is that weird?
Maybe
Yeah.
it can just be an exhibit to one of the others, so that if those,
Exactly.
if one of those is even if it's discussion, at least we can comment on this as well.
The look on your face makes you think I've suggested something strange.
Oh, no.
Or difficult.
No, I'm just thinking about how that would fit. I think the thing is that it would be, knowing that we want to talk about the geo contract itself and this Western base, I'm not.
Does it broaden the scope of that
Yeah.
specific
so I
conversation?
think-
You wanted to have too much to throw this
No,
into?
I think maybe just bringing this report back as a separate item. It'll correspond with
Okay.
these two, but I'm not sure we can mix it in with.
I leave that up to you and the chair and vice chair when you're deciding the agenda. I would love for this to be part of our materials to talk about at some point.
Okay.
I mean, I think what you're hearing from the commission or commissioners is that I appreciate that you think of these as individual contracts, but we also think of them as collectively as what our resources are, and deciding what makes sense for one I guess in our minds anyways, impacted by the entire portfolio. And so just to make sure that we have that bigger context while we're discussing the individual contracts in one form or another.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay, any other items for future topics, for future meetings? Sorry. Okay, then I think we have reached that time. Anybody want to move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays. See you next year, I guess.